Hi everyone, so I'm literally just straight back from seeing Babygirl, and I will say to you this: you will want to laugh, you will be excruciatingly embarrassed, you will sometimes be a little bit bored, but you might also be quite profoundly moved. It's a strange film because it sort of treats as shocking something which I'm not sure is very shocking, which is S&M desires. I think society has moved past just innately finding that stuff shocking. And yet, actually, it uses those desires and that kind of relationship as a way to think about relationship, love, and most provocatively and interestingly, innocence in a way that I really hadn't expected and found myself suddenly moved by, partly because Nicole Kidman is brilliant in it. She plays a woman who runs some kind of corporate firm. Actually, one of my favourite things about this film is that it basically indulges in brilliant, almost parodic corporate speak. So there are whole bits of the film where Nicole Kidman has to go and do her big job. And so she sits in front of people and says things like, the shares are sharesing, and the power that we are gaining is good. I value that because I am a rampant capitalist, which is only somewhat in conflict with my identity as a wife and mother. I don't know whether I am a tender, vulnerable person or a cruel, domineering one, and those are real conflicts that I might have. And I don't mean to cast any kind of, well, I do mean to cast some aspersions on that because it's a little bit crass, but actually, I enjoyed the fact that it also made corporate life look ridiculous. Like those scenes are so two-dimensional that they sort of have a message all of their own about the life she's leading. Then she gets involved with her intern, who's played by Harrison. So I can't remember. These are supposed to be spontaneous. The whole point of the film is that she's much more famous than him, or much more established than him anyway. So let's go with it. And he rapidly gains a kind of erotic power over her. Some of those early scenes, it really depends on the absolute brilliance of the two lead performances. I mean, he in particular is actually extraordinary. She's very, very, very good as well. Uh, it depends on that because the script is a little bit, sometimes a bit janky. Is that the American word? Janky? Well, it certainly rhymes with an English word, which could describe large parts of this film. But we get there. I mean, it's got that problem that every erotic thriller slightly has, which is that these two people meet and it's like, how are we going to get them into bed? It's like, how's it going to happen? It's sort of like a bad first date, the whole first part of the film. It's like, well, are we gonna, is it a bit too, what we should, right? I mean, that's kind of what you do. Or maybe you don't. Maybe it should be the second date. Well, we're half an hour into the film now. So it slightly has that problem, but then they do actually get on with it. But I'll tell you what I really liked. There's a moment when a Rubicon is crossed in their relationship, and you would think it was sexual, and at points it is, the Rubicon. But actually, the bit that really got me was when, for the first time, she decides to obey him, and he's holding a sweet in his hand, and she crawls across the floor in her heels and eats the sweet from out of his hand. And why that works so well is that you really get a sense of the bravery, actually, of Nicole Kidman. And the bravery is very interesting because at this stage, I think it gets a bit complicated later, but at this stage, this is very clearly a consensual, I think it's very clearly a consensual act of domination. She's agreed to it. But of course, there's no shame in that. There's no degradation in that. But Nicole Kidman doesn't know, does she, that the audience will agree that there's no degradation in it. She doesn't know the audience will take a progressive view of it or a compassionate view of it. She throws herself, in a sense, on the mercy of the audience, while also revealing her indifference to their mercy. Like, she's going to do it anyway. And of course, an act like that is actually more potentially comic, more easy to break the illusion, step out and laugh at, than I think any of the sex is. It's in some ways it's more intimate. And my artistic crush on Nicole Kidman just deepened as this film went on, because I thought this is at times a genuinely reckless, committed performance. I say at times because I think the script costs her something as the film goes on. And I admired her a lot for that, because she's saying, I know you as the audience are free to mock me for this. And some people might. There were people in the audience who laughed at her. But then she dares us to find it funny or degrading. And once you see her daring you, it isn't. Of course it isn't. And one of the things that she does beautifully is she shows this woman in the morass of entangled power relations and exploitations which are going on in the film. I mean, this man is her intern. Underneath all that, she's looking for something. And Nicole Kidman actually carries you with her on that journey through the sex scenes, primarily through the sex scenes. She uses them as a language. And what she gets down into through them is an experience of innocence. That was the word that came to me at a certain point while watching this. Innocence. And then a few minutes later, the male character said to her, we're just two kids playing. And of course that's sort of a grotesque thing to say in some ways, and yet it corresponded to something that I'd seen in her face, in her performance, in her eyes, which was an effort to recover something unfallen. And what is innocence in this film? Innocence is a spontaneous and powerful capacity for intimacy. Can you be intimate? Can you be spontaneous when you're intimate? And of course, the corporate world she's in is the opposite of all that. And yet it's totally concerned with power relations. And so by entering into this weird parody of those power relations, she sort of can undo the curse. That's kind of the storyline. But of course that storyline is massively ironized by the fact that she's constantly aware that she might be exploiting him. He's much younger, he's her intern. It would destroy her if it came out, but also maybe it should destroy her career if it came out. Maybe, we're not invited to think this was all okay, but at the same time, we're not invited to stop at condemning it. There's so much else going on, because of course it's a film about gender and power, and one character says to her at one point, I thought women would be different when they got into power. And that's a really important theme, but I don't think the script is good enough to explore it. The script doesn't do much outside the central character's psychology. Not even the male foil is very fully realised. And Antonio Banderas as the husband gets such short shrift from this script. So actually, in a way, it's this paean to new forms of relationship and intimacy in this woman's life. But the script isolates her completely, because even though she learns to relate in a new way to people, none of those people really seem to genuinely exist. So there are huge limitations in the script, but I think it's an important film because it refuses to agree with something that kept running through my mind as I watched it, which is something that Carl Jung said. I don't know why this came to my mind. Where there is love, there is no power, and where there is power, there is no love. This film says, hang on a minute, people are unbelievably complicated, and Nicole Kidman is able to hold that and show that, and I think that's very impressive. Thanks very much. Let me know what you think in the comments. I've never said that before, and have a nice night.